My name is Harper Linwood. I'm 32 and until recently, my family still believed I was just the plain daughter with a boring desk job somewhere in New York. My mom, Evelyn, was always the director of the household. She's the typical East Coast woman. Flawless hair, festive dresses, perfect dinner stories, and a gaze sharp enough to dissect each family member. My dad, Daniel, was the quiet type, the one who let her decide everything from dinner to our futures. Then there's Austin, my brother, whose every achievement was inflated into a family legend, from his 10-year-old basketball shot to his job as an assistant CFO at a real estate firm in Dallas. Me. I was the name mentioned last, if at all. I still remember one afternoon when I was 8. That day, I won first prize in a children's short story contest at Rosemont Elementary. I brought home the certificate, still fresh with ink, and practically screamed as I ran into the kitchen. Mom. I won first prize in the story contest. She glanced over while stirring the stock pot. That's nice, Harper. But Austin's got his cross-country race coming up. I need to make soup so he has energy. I stood there, certificate in hand, heart thudding like someone had knocked inside it. That night, the paper got tucked into an old book and sat in my drawer for 10 years before I opened it again. All through childhood, I learned to stay quiet during family gatherings. When Austin got a full athletic scholarship, my parents threw a party, hired a photographer, and even printed shirts that said, "Proud of Austin." When my first poem was published in a small literary magazine across state lines, my mother only said, "Be careful, sweetheart. Don't let all those sentimental things throw you off track." I wasn't angry. I no longer had the emotion for anger. Just an old emptiness, as if I were a side chair in a room only lit well enough for others. In high school, I tried harder, became editor-in-chief of the school paper, won a state literary analysis award, got nominated by a teacher for a summer writing program at a university. But at home, it all disappeared under Austin's enormous shadow, the one my parents called the Linwood family's great hope. Once, I gathered all my courage to tell Mom I got invited to a writing camp at UC Berkeley. She was picking flowers for Austin's 18th birthday party. I stood beside her, voice shaking. "Mom, I got invited to a summer writing program at UC Berkeley." "Berkeley?" She looked up, her lip curling like she was swallowing a chuckle. "So you're planning to write for a living? Maybe I should sign you up for accounting classes before it's too late." I froze, not from the words but from her eyes. That look of pity edged with ice, like I was a stray cat pawing at a locked glass door. I learned to pull away, to keep things to myself, to stop expecting to be heard. Sunday dinners followed the same tired script. Mom asked Austin about work, girlfriends, and his plans to buy a house. Dad nodded like a human calculator. When it was my turn, Mom barely glanced over. "What about you, Harper? Reading anything these days? Hopefully not those depressing family novels again." I nodded, swallowing what I really wanted to say, that I was working on my first manuscript, that I'd submitted it to 3 publishers, that I just got invited for an interview at an online literary magazine in Manhattan. But I had learned enough. No one in this house cared about a girl who wrote in the shadows. Austin once joked at dinner. "She must date a lot to write such tragic stuff, huh?" Mom burst into laughter, dabbing tears from her eyes with a napkin. I smiled faintly. My hands clenched under the table, nails digging into my palms, keeping the emotions sealed in. I wasn't angry. I didn't need to be. I had long understood that in this family I was the fated one. A talking shadow, smiling at the right moments, disappearing on cue. Harper Linwood, the daughter from the Linwood household in a fancy northern Texas suburb. People mentioned me like a comma between lively sentences about Austin. But I kept writing. Because I couldn't not write. I wrote while they watched TV downstairs. I wrote in the middle of the night while the house slept. I wrote with feelings I never spoke, with forgotten memories, with a voice I carved onto every page. I wrote because it was the only way I could exist. And I did, even if they never truly saw me. I started keeping things to myself around age 16. Not out of secrecy, but because after so many years of being dismissed, silence became a kind of armor, thin, but enough to shield against the small cuts my mother casually dealt in conversation. Edison High, the public school on the west side of Fort Worth, wasn't known for producing writers. The classrooms were hot in summer, freezing in winter. Projectors broke often. The library had only a few worn shelves. But in the chaos of lockers slamming, heels clicking, and the faint smell of cafeteria food, I found something I'd never felt at home: a space to claim my name. Miss McAllister, my 11th grade English teacher, was the first to really listen. "Harper, you write like you're hiding an entire world beneath the words," she said, her hand resting on my printed short story. "Don't let anyone convince you this is meaningless." I didn't answer. Just nodded, gathering my papers quickly, hoping she wouldn't see my hands shaking. After school that day, I walked 3 blocks to the library. Checked out a copy of the state's youth literary journal. Snuck it home and hid it under my mattress. That night, while Mom was preparing meat stew, she asked, "What SAT track are you aiming for?" "I already signed you up for the accounting prep course. My friend said her son got a job right after graduating." I stood at the kitchen table trying not to spill the milk. "I think I want to major in creative writing." She paused, turning toward me. "Creative writing? Harper, that's not a career. You think you're going to live off scribbles." I chuckled, not from humor but reflex. "Some people do make a living writing, Mom. Not normal people, sweetheart. Don't set yourself up for disappointment." That night, I didn't eat dinner. The family laughed over Austin's latest basketball award, the kind of kid I thought who could fall into a ditch and still get thanked by the principal. I withdrew. Simply stopped talking. New drafts were saved to a flash drive hidden behind an old picture on my bookshelf. I submitted stories via my personal email. Used a pen name to be safe. When one of them got picked up by Southern Ink, a small online zine for young writers, I didn't tell anyone. I just stared at that acceptance email under my covers, reading it over and over like it was a fragile truth I had to guard alone. I kept going to school. Kept eating Sunday dinners. Kept listening to Mom talk about the neighbor's new car, and Dad reading the paper without ever looking up to ask about my day. Until I won a full-ride scholarship for literature at Columbia University. I held the acceptance letter in my hand for nearly an hour, standing silently in my room, the white paper with bold print seeming to glow. The heading "Columbia University, Undergraduate Admission" made my heart skip. My grip was so tight the paper creased. That evening, I placed the letter on the dinner table just as everyone sat down. I got a full scholarship to study literature at Columbia. Austin set his spoon down and looked up. "Columbia? In New York?" I nodded. My mother only raised an eyebrow. "Literature? Yes. I'll be studying writing." She pressed her lips together. "You think you can live in New York and just write stories? Does that scholarship cover reality?" "It's full, Mom. Tuition, housing, living expenses. Everything." "And after graduation?" She poured water like she was reviewing a loan application. "Do you know how many literature majors end up unemployed?" I looked at my dad. He was halfway to picking up a piece of bread, silent. Austin chimed in. "Well, it's not that bad, Mom. Columbia's prestigious." Mom glanced at Austin. "Right. If only she were studying something respectable." I pulled the letter back, folded it, and tucked it into my bag. I didn't say another word. Somewhere in my heart, a door closed, not because of fresh hurt but because the old wounds had never healed. I left Texas a month later with 3 suitcases, a laptop, and a nearly 300-page manuscript no one in my family had ever read. The last night before I left, I stood on the porch looking at the freshly painted white fence. The smell of paint still lingered. A breeze passed through, and for the first time in years I felt like the wind didn't blow through me anymore. As if I was no longer invisible, at least not to myself. The day I boarded the plane, Mom walked me to the security gate. No hug. Just said, "If you get tired of all that literary nonsense, just come home. The door's still open." I turned back and smiled, a breeze-light smile. "No need to keep it open, Mom. I don't plan on knocking again." I stepped through the checkpoint. Ahead was New York, filled with words waiting to be named. Behind, just the silence I had learned to live with and move beyond. The freshman dorms at Columbia University were nothing like the movies. My room was barely 200 square feet, with water stains on the walls and a window that creaked when cold air blew in. I pushed my desk into the corner, placed my old laptop where the morning light hit just right. That's where I spent hours, not just studying but writing, amid the chaos of a city that never slept. I quickly realized the full scholarship didn't cover everything. Books, course materials, subway cards, daily coffee, all ate into the small savings I'd brought. After the first month, I started looking for a part-time job. Ruse Brew in Midtown was hiring a morning barista. I applied and got hired because I could tell the difference between an espresso and an Americano. My shift started at 6 a.m., which meant waking at 5:15, catching the train from 116th to 59th. I learned to carry trays with one hand, smile when customers yelled, and make coffee while listening to Sylvia Plath poems through my earbuds. My shift ended at 11. I jogged back to campus, made it to class by noon. Eyes red from sleep deprivation, hands smelling like cocoa powder, but my mind was full of stories waiting to be written. I kept writing consistently. Short stories, notes, novel drafts. Some nights, I stayed up until 2 a.m. rewriting 3 opening lines. Some nights I wrote nothing, just stared at the blank screen like it was judging me. Every month I submitted at least 3 pieces to literary magazines. Some big, some tiny. Just as often I got rejection letters. Some never responded. Some sent back 2 lines, not aligned with our editorial direction. I printed them out and taped them to the wall across from my bed. Nearly 30 sheets filled one corner. Each rejection was a small cut to my patience, but also a reminder. I was still moving forward. In the spring of sophomore year, my editing professor referred me to a literary journal called Ash Pine. One of the senior editors, Margaret Dwyer, was looking for an assistant intern. I applied without much hope, so when the acceptance email arrived, I thought they had the wrong person. On my first day at the office, I wore a pale blue shirt, dark slacks, and a pair of discount boots. The office was on the 6th floor of an old building on Green Street, its walls lined with framed covers from the past 25 years. I was seated next to a petite silver-haired woman with eyes sharp as blades, Eleanor Caro. I'd heard of her. She'd discovered many major authors, and was notorious for not being pleasant. She gave me a quick glance and said, "No need for small talk. I make my own coffee. If you read something that's bad, say it. But tell me why." She didn't compliment, didn't encourage. But when I handed her a draft of my short story, quiet like wind skimming water, she read it and simply nodded. "Keep that rhythm. Don't let it slip." That was it. But in Eleanor's world, I knew that meant acceptance. 3 months later, she passed that manuscript to a small magazine in Brooklyn. They published it. 2 weeks later, I got an email from a representative at North Mill Books, an independent publisher. They wanted to meet, asked if I was working on a novel. I sent them 60 pages I'd written through winter. 3 weeks later, they offered me a book deal. Whispers Beneath Glass Water. That's the title they chose. The story was about family memories left unspoken, about a nameless daughter in her own home. I didn't tell anyone in my family about the book. I didn't send a single press clipping back to Texas when it launched. The release happened when I was 27 at a small bookstore in Brooklyn. Over 50 people came, mostly literary friends, a few former classmates, and some readers who'd found me through magazines. I sat at the signing table, hand trembling as I passed the pen to the first reader. She looked to be in her 40s, light brown curls, bright eyes. "Your story, it's my life," she whispered. I read it in one night, then cried like I never had before. I couldn't speak, just handed her the pen to sign her name. My hand no longer shook, but my heart was singing. A month later, Whispers Beneath Glass Water was nominated for a National Critics Association award. 2 months after that, it made the Times bestseller list. Not the top spot, but high enough to be noticed. I still walked every morning through the soft-lit streets of Brooklyn, still stopped at the local bakery, still wrote each night in my 1-bedroom rental desk by the window overlooking the park. My life wasn't loud. But day by day, word by word, I was emerging from the shadow of years spent unseen. What I didn't know was that very soon my name would be spoken, at my family's own dinner table, and everything they thought they knew about me would shatter like a glass dropped on marble. It took me nearly 4 years to complete The Silence Between Sisters, my second novel, which critics later called a book that doesn't need to scream to keep you breathless. I didn't rush the writing. Instead, I lived with each character like they were extensions of the emptiness in me. The story was about 2 sisters divided by a mother's favoritism. One loved unconditionally, the other only mentioned when convenient. No one knew I was writing it except my editor, Mason. A steady, quiet man, formerly the senior editor at the Eastbound Review. He understood structure, pacing, and more importantly, he understood the kind of quiet anger I never named. When he read the first draft, he closed the manuscript and said, "You're not writing about your family. You're dissecting it. And the scariest thing is, none of it feels fake." I smiled. Not in agreement or denial. Just a smile. When The Silence Between Sisters was released, it didn't cause a splash right away. Early sales were decent at best. But then came the review in The Atlantic. They called it, "a fine blade driven deep into kinship distorted by bias and expectation." 2 weeks later, The New Yorker included me in their list of 20 literary voices under 35 to watch. By week 10, The Silence Between Sisters climbed to number 8 on the New York Times bestseller list. I got a call from the indie studio Glassbridge Pictures. They wanted to adapt the novel into a limited series. The producer emailed me an invitation to fly to Los Angeles to discuss the screenplay. They booked me into the top floor of the Mondrian Hotel, with a balcony overlooking the entire city. I sat alone on a wooden chair in the hotel suite, a cup of hot tea in hand, watching streetlights blur through the early fog. Everything was real yet distant, like I was watching myself through a screen. A week later, I was invited to teach a short-term advanced writing course at Emerson College in Boston, meant for graduating seniors. On the first day, one student stood up and said, "Professor Harper Linwood, I've read your novel 3 times. It's the reason I chose this major." I thanked her, kept my tone even. But inside, something flickered, not pride but a soft sadness. Because no one in my family had ever asked what I was doing. No phone calls. No messages from mom or dad. Austin still occasionally sent photos from company parties with a note that said, "Everyone says hi, but I never once saw my name mentioned in those dinners." I don't resent it anymore. I don't expect anything either. I've grown used to living in parallel. One life acknowledged out there and one long silence that stretched 15 years back home. I have real friends now. People in the industry who understand that sometimes the hardest part isn't the writing, but believing you deserve the success. I have Mason, who always sends edits on time and never once asked about my family, as if he knew that was a boundary. I avoid national talk shows. I don't answer biographical questions unless required. My author bio only says, "Born in Texas. Currently lives and works in Brooklyn." I don't mention family. No photos from home when a book comes out. Maybe deep down I still fear that moment of dismissal. I'm still not brave enough to hear my mother say, "Oh, you write stories." I thought that was just silly stuff. In March, I received an email from the National Literary Guild. They informed me I'd been nominated for the Vermont Literary Award, one of the oldest prizes in the East, honoring works about family and memory. I was invited to speak at the ceremony in Philadelphia. Standing at the podium, the spotlight on my face, in a hall with over 300 people listening as I read an excerpt, I wasn't thinking about mom or Austin or dad. I was thinking of the 17-year-old girl curled up in a dorm room, quietly taping rejection letters to the wall, then still opening her laptop to keep writing. She wasn't a genius. Just someone so used to being overlooked she learned how to survive in silence, and used that silence to build a world no one could ignore. On the way back to the hotel, I got an email from a college professor. They wanted to include The Silence Between Sisters in their syllabus for the course, Modern Symbolism in Family Literature. Another message from Mason, Vermont. Deserved. I held his name on my phone screen, stared at those 2 words. Then deleted my reply. I'd call him later. On the ride back to Brooklyn, as the taxi crossed the Manhattan Bridge, I didn't feel victorious. I felt at peace, the kind of peace that doesn't need validation. Something no one could take from me. What I didn't expect was someone bringing up my name at a family dinner in Fort Worth. Someone who wasn't part of my home, yet somehow saw me clearer than anyone else ever had. And with just a touch on her phone, she unlocked a door I had spent my whole life carefully keeping closed. Mom called on Monday, her tone unusually cheerful. "Be sure to come early this Sunday. We're throwing an engagement party for Austin and Clara. Even Uncle Trevor's whole family will be there." I cut in with a simple reply, "I'll be there." No follow-up questions, no mention of my life or work in Brooklyn. The same hollow interaction, like I was just an extra seat to fill. That Sunday afternoon, I drove from the airport hotel to our old neighborhood in Grapevine. Along the road, the oak trees still stood tall like frozen markers of time, The only difference was I no longer avoided their gaze. In front of the house, Austin's new Audi was parked neatly alongside two sparkling SUVs under the sun. I turned off the engine, sat for a few more seconds, watching Mom orchestrate the welcome like she had for the past 20 years. Fresh flowers, monogrammed napkins, fine china rimmed in gold only brought out for important occasions. Dad opened the door. "Harper, come in, sweetheart. Everyone's in the living room." He gave me a brief hug and walked ahead, not noticing that I was a step slower. I passed through the familiar hallway lined with photos of Austin, graduation, Colorado vacation, corporate gala night, but not a single picture of me. That feeling no longer stung. It was just quiet confirmation. In the living room, Mom sat next to Clara, her hand on Clara's shoulder like staking a claim. Clara smiled at me. "Harper, it's so nice to meet you. Austin told me you live in New York." "Yeah," I nodded. "You picked a good day to get engaged." "Not too hot." Mom chimed in. "Where is it you work again? Some small publishing place, right?" I turned to answer, but she continued. "Not like Austin. Just got promoted to regional finance director. We're so proud of him." Austin cleared his throat. "Mom." "What?" "I'm just saying the truth. Harper's always been into books, writing all the time. Not everyone needs to shine." I stayed quiet. Dinner was served in the main dining room. A long table with a white tablecloth, glowing gold candles, handwritten menus in navy blue ink. I was seated across from Austin and Clara, farthest from Mom, as always, never near the highest voice in the house. Mom poured wine for everyone. When she reached me, she paused. "Still avoiding alcohol, Harper? Gotta keep that brain sharp for your little poems." Clara tilted her head, eyes wide. "You write poetry?" I didn't know. I was about to reply when Mom laughed. "She's always got her laptop open. Always writing something. No one in this house has ever read anything Harper's written. Must be classified like the CIA," she said, chuckling, looking around the table for a laugh. Clara spoke gently as if to ease the tension. "Actually, I really love literature. If you've ever published something, I'd love to read it." Mom shrugged. "Probably nothing worth reading. Harper just dabbles, she's no real writer." The room went quiet. Clara set her glass down and gently pulled her phone from her purse. I caught a glimpse of her typing my name into the search bar. Her fingers paused, then began scrolling quickly. It took only 10 seconds. "Harper Linwood, right?" Clara asked, her tone now different. I looked at her without flinching. "Yes." Mom shook her head. "She probably made up a pen name and posted something on some blog. It's not like..." "No," Clara interrupted, her voice full of disbelief. "This is an official author profile on Penguin Random House. A novel called Whispers Beneath Glass Water, winner of the Vermont Literary Award last year. It's being adapted into a series by Glassbridge." Austin turned to look at me, mouth slightly open but no words came. Dad looked up from his plate, eyes confused. "And Mom?" Her face had gone pale. Her hand still held the spoon, frozen midair. Clara turned the screen toward everyone. "Here's her Wikipedia page, a photo from the award ceremony in Philadelphia. And this is a list of her interviews." Mom snatched the phone and stared at the picture of me in a strapless black dress, speaking at a podium. "Harper, you actually wrote all this?" I didn't answer. Clara continued reading. "She taught at Emerson, was a guest at the Atlantic's Literary Summit, and was named one of 40 voices redefining contemporary American literature." Mom abruptly placed the phone on the table. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I turned my water glass slowly in my hand. "I did. But you said, 'Don't kid yourself.'" No one said a word. Clara turned to Austin. "You didn't know?" Austin blinked and swallowed a sip of wine. "She's never told me." I looked at my brother. "You never asked." Austin's engagement party, meant to honor a golden child, had veered off course in an instant. The two worlds I'd kept apart for a decade collided like a storm slamming into a silk-covered table. And in that storm I remained dry. The silver spoon in Mom's hand trembled slightly, clicking against the rim of her glass. The room was silent. No one touched the prosciutto or the expensive cheese platters. Clara glanced around as if just realizing she had stepped into a fault line no one had dared to expose for years. "You should have been clearer," my mom said, her voice unsteady. If it mattered that much, why hide it from the family? I didn't react right away. That question wasn't new, just the audience. Do you remember when I got my first short story published? I looked her in the eye. I was 16. It was in Southern ink. I placed the printout on the dinner table. You picked it up, skimmed it, then stacked the utility bills on top. I can't be expected to remember every little paper you brought home, she said, eyes avoiding mine. This house was always busy with Austin's milestones, graduations, championships, things that were real. I had real things too, Mom. They just didn't fit into the frame you liked. Dad sat quietly, hands on his lap, his usual smile gone. He looked at Mom, then at me, as if searching for a meaning he wasn't sure he'd ever known. When I got the full scholarship to Columbia, I told you. You asked one thing. What kind of job do you get from writing? I said clearly, every word measured. When I signed my first book deal, I mailed you a copy with a handwritten card. No one replied. No text. No call. Do you remember that? Mom stared at her still full plate. Maybe it got lost, she whispered, too faintly to believe herself. No, Mom. I lifted my head. I found it in the living room cabinet that Thanksgiving, still sealed, never opened, stuffed between your bank statements. Austin placed his wineglass down, his gaze slicing through the tension. Mom, I think Harper tried. We definitely missed something. My mother turned to him, startled, as if publicly questioned. I just wanted what's best for my children. If Harper truly wanted us to know, she should have made it clearer, taken initiative. I did everything I could, I said, this time letting the tremble in my voice show. But every time I spoke, it circled back to Austin, as if I was only allowed to exist on the edge of the spotlight. Clara gripped Austin's hand. Her silence wasn't discomfort, it was empathy. I'm not trying to make anyone feel guilty. But if you ask why I kept things private, here's the answer. Every time I shared something, it was met with indifference, with that mix of pity and mockery. Mom took a deep breath but still didn't look up. You've always been too sensitive, Harper. I never meant to belittle you. I let out a soft laugh. It wasn't joyful, more like something cracked open in an old wound that never quite healed. When you said I'd just write silly things in front of everyone at dinner, what was that if not belittling? The question hung in the air. No one answered. My father turned away, eyes on the window where the late afternoon sun faded behind the trees. His eyes looked cloudier than the last time I came home. No certainty remained, only a long, aching quiet. I've lived almost half my life split in two, I went on. One side was Harper in New York, lecturing at Emerson, praised in critiques, invited to conferences Mom's never heard of. The other was Harper at this table, the poetry girl no one reads. I don't think you hate me, I added, voice gentler. But you've never really seen me. Austin leaned forward, voice thick. I didn't realize you've carried so much. I'm truly sorry. I nodded, my chest tightening at the weight in his face. Claire turned to my mom softly. I read her work before I knew she was family. It felt so real, I thought she was writing about me. Mom said nothing. She quietly placed her napkin on her lap, then abruptly stood. I need some air, she whispered, stepping toward the back patio, her shoulders trembling with every step. No one followed. No one spoke. The room stayed still. But it was no longer the old silence. It was the stillness of something dragged into the light after being buried for decades. I wasn't sure what had just begun. Only that what had been hidden for 20 years finally had a name, even if no one was fully ready to hear it yet. No one said anything for several minutes after Mom stepped out to the backyard. The wind slipping through the cracked door made a sound like paper brushing against itself. The air in the dining room felt heavy but not suffocating. More like a thick layer of dust had finally been wiped off, revealing the real wood beneath. My dad cleared his throat and gently pushed his chair back. He didn't leave the table, just leaned toward me like he was about to say something he'd been holding in for too long. Harper, he said, his voice rough and slow, I read a few pages from the print copy you sent last year. Your mom left it in the living room, tucked in between a pile of old papers. I couldn't hide my surprise. I thought it was never opened. She went out of town for a few days. I came across it by chance. Read a few paragraphs and I couldn't stop. He rested his hand on the table, his fingers tapping like he was feeling around for the right words. You wrote exactly what it feels like, to be overlooked. About kids who learn to stay quiet to survive. I saw myself in that. Not as the child, but the adult watching from the outside, knowing something was wrong but too afraid to speak up. A long silence settled. My father didn't look away from me. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not just for not reading it sooner. But for letting you grow up in a house where you didn't feel like you belonged. For not speaking up when I should have." I gently clasped my hands under the table. The old anger softened, not gone but reshaped into something quieter, more tired. "I never expected you to go against Mom," I said. "I just wanted to see your hand on my shoulder. Just once. The way you always did with Austin after every graduation." My father lowered his head. "I finished the silence between sisters last week." I looked up, a wave of emotion hitting my chest. "I didn't think you," I paused. The scene where the main character slips her manuscript into her dad's coat pocket at a parent-teacher night. Only he never finds it. I sat there for over 10 minutes. A faint smile touched his lips, but his eyes were red. Not because he didn't love her, but because he didn't know what to do with that love. Austin reached out and lightly touched my hand. I read it too. I turned to him. The confident look he usually wore had softened into something more sincere, unexpectedly gentle. "I never blamed you," I said quietly. "I know," Austin replied. "But I still feel ashamed. I was so busy being loved, I didn't realize someone right next to me was being left behind." Clara squeezed Austin's shoulder. She didn't speak, just gave me a warm, steady look. She was keeping the moment grounded, making sure the room didn't slip too far into sentiment. Her presence was the anchor in all this. The door opened. My mother came back in. Her face no longer perfectly made up. Her eyes were a bit swollen, a few strands of hair out of place. She sat down, laid her napkin across her lap, and didn't look at anyone for a few seconds. "I'm not someone who apologizes easily," she began. "Or admits when I'm wrong. Maybe that's part of the problem." No one interrupted. "I always thought Harper didn't need us," she continued, her voice raspy. "You've always done everything on your own. Never asked for anything. I thought that meant you were fine." "I didn't need rescuing," I said. "But I used to need to be seen." She gave a faint nod, like my words had just unlocked an old, rusty door inside her. "I read a chapter of your book this morning," she admitted. "Clara left the e-book on my Kindle. I didn't know it was yours." She blinked rapidly. "There's a line where the main character says, 'I'm not angry I was forgotten. I'm angry I once tried so hard to be remembered.'" I closed the Kindle after that. I didn't say anything for nearly 2 hours. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. "You write well," she said. "No undercut, no dismissiveness. More than well. It makes people stop." My mother didn't apologize. But she didn't have to spell it out. Her eyes held something they hadn't before, recognition, however awkward. I stood up, walked around the table, stopped in front of her, and handed her a printout of my new manuscript, the one I was editing. I didn't say anything. Just placed it on her lap and went back to my seat. Clara whispered, "You should read the last chapter first." My mother gave a small nod. She didn't touch the manuscript yet. But this time I believed it wouldn't be buried under a pile of bills. It wouldn't be forgotten in the living room shelf. No more words were needed. We finished dinner in a soft quiet. No tension. No dramatics. Just 4 people at a table, finally meeting each other's eyes without flinching. 3 weeks after that chaotic dinner, I got a text from Austin. Short classic hymn. "Mom asked what your next book is called. Don't laugh." I didn't laugh. I stared at the screen for a long time, my hand tightening slightly around my coffee mug. The message wasn't dramatic or guilt-ridden. It was a small, clear gesture. A person who once didn't care trying to open a door they'd never noticed before. That night, I got an email from the local bookstore in Grapevine. Subject line: Harper Linwood, guest reading invitation. Turns out the neighborhood women, including my mom, had started a Wednesday book club. The event coordinator was Elaine, an old friend of Mom's. One of the first people to leave a kind review of The Silence Between Sisters on Goodreads. I hit reply without needing to think. "If you're truly interested in discussing the work, I'd be happy to join." A week later, I flew back to Texas. No one met me at the airport, but the car ride with my dad felt different. He told me he'd read all 3 books. along with the critical reviews. When I asked which character was his favorite, he answered without hesitation, Angela, the eldest sister. There's something real in her eyes even when no one's watching. Dinner that night was simple. Chicken soup, salad, toasted bread. No fancy tablecloths, no candles, no pretense. My mother walked in from the kitchen holding a thick book, marked up with highlighter and sticky notes. The older sister in the novel. Is that supposed to be you? She asked without a hint of tension in her voice. She's a part of me, I said. But I write from experience, not autobiography. Mom didn't press further. She just nodded, then flipped to a bookmarked page. This part, where she's standing at her brother's wedding and no one remembers inviting her. I read it 3 times. I'm not sure if it felt familiar or strange. I didn't answer. Partly because my throat tightened. And partly because she had just admitted more than I ever thought she could. Austin called the next evening. Are you free on Saturday? Depends on what for. Clara wants you to read something at the engagement party. I think you should. I leaned back on the couch, staring out the living room window where warm light filtered through the curtain. Are you sure? I don't want the only speech to come from a dad who needs wine to get through 2 sentences of thanks, Austin half joked. I want people to know who you are. Not just as my sister, but as you. I agreed. The engagement party was held at a cozy little Italian restaurant near Grapevine Lake. The setting was warm, with string lights hanging overhead, long tables with white linens and short vases of aster flowers. I was seated between Clara and Austin at the main table. When the MC handed me the mic, there was a bit of murmuring. Some guests didn't know my name, only that someone in the family would be reading a little something. I stepped up to the podium, placed the printout in front of me, and glanced over the crowd. I'm not great at public speaking, even though I live in language every day. But today, I'm not here as a writer. I'm here as someone who once thought she was just a background character in her own family. A few people tilted their heads slightly. I'd like to read a short passage from an unpublished manuscript, a short story called The Empty Chairs. I read. Just a few hundred words. A passage about a woman who always sat at the edge of family gatherings, someone no one noticed standing up or sitting down. She listened, remembered everyone's stories, but no one asked what she thought. Until one day someone pulled out the chair at the center of the table, not out of pity but because they finally saw her. When I looked up, the room had gone still, like someone had turned the volume down. Clara gently dabbed her eyes. Austin sat upright, fingers laced on the table. My mom was looking straight ahead. Not crying, but her lips were pressed tight like she was holding something back. I stepped down slowly. Every step back to my seat felt lighter, as if the hardwood floor no longer carried the weight of years spent being unseen. The party continued. But this time people talked to me, not just around me. One of Clara's friends leaned in and whispered, I read your first book without realizing you were real. I smiled. A lot of people in my family thought the same. My mom came up to me after the party ended. She didn't hug me, but she said quietly, if you finish the manuscript, would you send it to me first? I turned to her. I will. Recognition, even late, doesn't fix everything. But it opens a crack of light. Just enough for me to step through. No more screaming. No more disappearing. Just standing tall, inside my own family, as someone with a voice that truly matters. Harper's story resonates because she didn't just survive being overlooked. She transformed her pain into power. Though she was once dismissed, she refused to let silence swallow her and instead built a world through words that demanded to be heard. When the truth finally surfaced, Harper didn't choose bitterness. She chose healing through expression. Recognition that comes late can't erase all the wounds, but it's enough to prove. A woman who knows her worth can never have her light denied. What are your thoughts on Harper's journey and how she faced her family's indifference? Share your reflections below. And don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss more powerful, emotional stories about family and connection.